It's so good to see you guys, and thank you for all of you who were with us last week. It's good to see. I see some familiar faces, and it's great to have you guys back. And for anybody who is joining us for the first time, I'm really glad to have you guys as well. It's a great honor to be asked to present this. I was just this last weekend, I was down on the Gulf Coast and did the entire full day workshop there with a group that people came from Florida and Louisiana, and they were down in Gulfport, Mississippi, and we got to do the whole thing together. And but I'm really excited to do this part with you today. For those of you that weren't with us last week, we did the first three steps. We did basically the surrender. We looked at our powerless and our unmanageability, and we all made the declaration that we were, in fact, we had a problem that we could not solve on our own. We sort of simplified all of that into that big kind of broad statement. And that way we take the steps, we kind of wrap it around everybody. This is very inclusive. There's over 300 different anonymous fellowships that practice the 12 steps. I qualify for about 173 of them. But who's got the time? I'm Carver. I'm an alcoholic and an addict. God got me sober on June the 14th, 2004. And from that time to today, I haven't had the need to take a drink, take a drug, or marry a stranger, which was a big problem for me. We'll talk about that later, maybe not. I don't know. But anyway, so I take the steps from a lot of different angles and points of view. But today we're going to be focusing on step 4 and step 5. This is all based on the work of Wally Patton, Paton, and Wally's book, Back to Basics, which he wrote as a history book of the beginner meetings of the 1940s. Turned out people saw the format for the way people took the steps in the 1940s as a really efficient way to take the 12 steps, and people started getting sober. The book has sold some neighborhood of 750,000 copies, and translated into multiple languages. And I've presented with Wally, and it's been a great honor to be on this journey with him. So anyway, I wanted you guys, we finished, if you guys will remember, we finished last week with the third step prayer, which is on page 63 in the big book. Now, I want you guys to get your big book. This is an oxymoron. This is a little big book. It doesn't matter what size it is. You're going to need a pen. I'm going to recommend you get a highlighter if you don't have one. I don't know. This is just me. I like to maybe, yeah, thank you. And whatever color it is all good. I like to color. I guess it's still, I'm still a kid at heart. But today, since we're going to be doing an inventory together, it's good to have a piece of paper. So grab a piece of paper, something you can write on. It's not going to need to be a whole lot. In the 1940s, I'll just kind of say that the steps were done. This is one of the spiritual principles of the way the steps were done in the 1940s, is they took the steps quickly and often. If you guys will recall, in several places in the archives, it was noted that Dr. Bob took 5,000 men and women through the steps. You can find that in Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, and in a couple of other places in our archives and material. And if you do the math on that, Dr. Bob lived, if I recall, 10 years from the time he got sober to where he died of emphysema. And that's like 1.3 people a day. How do you take 1.3 people a day through the steps without taking off Christmas? Well, he did it at the hospital, at St. Thomas Hospital, where he and Sister Ignatius worked. And they took folks through the steps while they detoxed at St. Thomas Hospital. And detox in the 1940s lasted approximately 3 days. Sister Ignatius was the first 3 steps. She was the surrender specialist. Dr. Bob would, the people in detox couldn't hold a pen or write very well. Dr. Bob wrote their inventory, and the people in detox told their stories. And what was Dr. Bob writing? He was writing down the people they needed to make amends to. And one of the 4 methods or multiples of the methods that they used to do their 9th step to make their amends in the 1940s. So people in the 1940s, they were taking the steps in a matter of days, not months, not years. They took the steps quickly and often. And that's the principles of the whole thing. Now, if you'll look in your big book with me on page 63, you'll remember that we finished with the 3rd step prayer. And if you look down from there at the bottom of the page, 2 lines from the bottom, you're going to see the very first word, and the first word is next. And that means, so the question is, when should you do your inventory? Well, next, you should do it right after you've done, the way they did it was they did it right after they did the 3rd step prayer. And this was my experience with my sponsor. We did the 3rd step prayer together. We were in a coffee shop. People were walking around. I thought it was very intrusive. He didn't seem to mind. I got over it pretty quick, but we did the 3rd step prayer together. And then he said, now you're going to do an inventory. And I said, I'm going to do a, what are we doing? He says, you're going to be doing an inventory. He said, the instructions are in the book. So highlight with me 2 lines from the bottom on page 63 and make a little note there with your pen. Write step 4, just so that you'll have a little notation there as you're taking a newcomer through the steps, that beginning with that word next, that's where the discussion of step 4 begins. So highlight along with me. Next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted, though our decision was a vital and crucial step. It could have little permanent effect. Don't we want this to be permanent? I want this to be permanent. Permanent effect, unless at once. When should we do this? We should do this at once, followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. Our liquor was but a symptom. Underline that. We could do an hour on that one line. Our liquor was but a symptom. I put myself, into treatment for really just wanting to get rid of the liquor, and come to realize that wasn't really my problem. That was just a symptom of my problem. I'm so grateful to the therapist and the guides that I've had in my life. So continue to highlight. So we had to get down to causes and conditions. Therefore, we started on a personal inventory. This was step 4. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and a fact-facing process. It's an effort to discover the truth about the stock in trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods, to get rid of them promptly and without regret. Now let's pause right there. So this is an important thing we just looked at that sometimes people can overlook. So the author of the big book has now compared our personal inventory to a business inventory. Now, if you and I, if we all were running a business and we were going to do an inventory, would you just count the stuff you're throwing out, or would you also count the stuff you're keeping? Wouldn't you inventory both? You'd want to know the inventory you're keeping. You'd also want to know the inventory you're getting rid of. Now think in terms of that as a personal inventory. Wouldn't it be important for you to know the character defects you want to get rid of, right? But isn't it just as important to inventory the character assets that you're keeping? And you know, how many times when, especially in April, when we do a lot of, in our 12-step meetings, we talk a lot about step 4, but how many times do we ever talk about character assets? You know, we talk a whole lot. And I just want to make sure, you know, when I'm having a discussion about step 4, I don't want newcomers to get the impression that we are just an accumulation of the bad stuff in our lives. Does that make sense? I want us to take a clear and honest look at ourselves through the inventory process. And to me, that means looking at the defects of character, but also the assets of character. Now, in the case of me and my inventory with my sponsor, I wasn't really dialed in too well to assets at the time. I was pretty filled with shame and regret. And my sponsor had to help me by pointing out some of my assets of character, because I was pretty well looking at the bad stuff. Now, move down to the next paragraph, and we're going to highlight again. And this is where, do you see where in the middle of the page, start highlighting with, we did exactly the same thing with our lives. In other words, we took a business inventory with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we've searched out the flaws in our makeup, which had caused our failure. That wasn't the only way we looked at it. That was just the first way we looked at it. Being convinced that self manifested in various ways was what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestations. Now, I draw a line right there, because that's a little pause, because now, immediately with the very next line, the authors of the big book are going to tell us what we're going to start writing. And so you pick up again, continue to highlight with me right there. It says resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. Then jump down about 4 lines from there and begin to highlight. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. Now, grab your pen and get your paper out. And that's what we're going to do. I'm going to have us pause just for a second, and I'm going to do it with you. I want you to write down on your paper. I just want you to make a list. This is going to be the very first inventory. You could just title it, if you want, resentment inventory, right? And then I want you to make a list of who or what are you angry at? Who or what are you angry at? You know? And this could be, according to what we just highlighted, could be a person, could be a principle, could be an institution. I did this with this group on the Gulf Coast. I told them, if you're going to put people's names down, it's okay to just put initials. I suggested, especially if they're sitting next to you, it'd be really great to use initials if they're sitting right next to you. That would be really appropriate. Just wanted to throw that out in case you're near somebody, just saying. So just right now, make a note. Who or what are you angry at? And I'm going to have to make a confession. You know, whenever I do a resentment inventory, more often than not, I wind up on there. You know, nobody lets me down better than me. And somebody is asking, what if I don't hold any resentments right now? You know, I'm saying, God bless you. Would you be my sponsor? I think that's great. If any of the things that we write down that you don't have, then I would say, I would say that the Dalai Lama's in here with us, probably doesn't have, Thich Nhat Hanh probably doesn't have any resentments. I would say just don't put anything down if you don't have any. That's absolutely fair and good. And then the next time, if we come back to do it, and if you have some that have popped up, you can put them down then. But please don't just need to put something down to just to put space down. If you haven't got anything, you leave it blank with my permission. God bless you. God bless you. I'm going to hang out with you. We're going to have, I don't know who you are, but we're going to have coffee one day. Yeah. Cause I'm not a abjectly angry person, but I've got things that certainly disappoint me, and things that and a lot of times it's me that I'm not doing everything that I need to be doing, and I let myself down. So what are you angry at? If you're struggling, you could put COVID down. I think is that an institution? It feels like it doesn't right now. It sure feels like it. So all you're doing is making a list. Now, some people will say, and you may be thinking, well, what about that columned inventory over there on page 65? When I went through this material, I saw the assets, the business inventory, and then I went over there and I saw the columned inventory, and it didn't really make sense to me in a way. It didn't seem like that the description fit the diagram in a way. And I went over this with Wally Patton, the author of Back to Basics, and Wally told me, he said that instructions for how to do a columned inventory were not published until the 1970s. He said the people in the 40s and 50s didn't know that columned inventory didn't make sense, and nobody used it. They just made lists. They listed, because remember, and this is a spiritual principle from the 1940s, the healing is in the sharing, not in the writing. You can write all you want, learn everything you want to. Self-knowledge avails us what? Nothing. You can learn all there is to know about yourself and be crazy as you can be. It's not until you share your stories, and we'll look at that. That's when the magic happens. All right. So at the bottom of page 64, I want you to write, get your pen. Now, this is where you're going to take the newcomer for the next part in the inventory. I want you to write fear inventory, page 68. Fear inventory, page 68. And then flip over with me once you've got that done. Flip over with me to page 68. Find the second paragraph. It's way at the top of the page. And you'll see where it says we reviewed, and get your highlighter out and start highlighting with me right there. It says we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. We ask ourselves why we had them. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. So right there, I want you to pause and go back to your inventory, and I want you to make a new column, and I want you to write fear inventory. And then I want you to make a list, and the question is, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? I think I told you guys I'm 65 years old with a 5-year-old. And, I'm afraid that I'm not going to have enough energy. I went bowling with my 5-year-old today, and I think I have sciatica now. I'm not sure. I'm going to have to, I've got my deep relief gel This workshop is sponsored by Deep Relief Gel, made by somebody, I don't know. Anyway, so I'm old. Anyway, don't let me do your inventory for you, but make a list of the things that you're afraid of. What are you afraid of? And and then here, can a relationship be a fear? Boy, absolutely. Just ask some of my ex-wives. I mean, one of my ex-wives was bipolar. She came to me one day and said they were both leaving, and it was terrifying. And I was, man, I'm just telling you, she could do things with a hammer and an ashtray that would just terrify you. That's a story for another day. But that's a good question. Absolutely, you better believe it. Fear can be people. Fear can be things. COVID can pop up again there. That little all the variants of it and all. So all you're going to do in this case is you're making a list. We're not talking about causes and effects or anything. All right. Has everybody got something down? All right, excellent. Well, at the bottom of page 68, get your pen, and you're going to tell the newcomer that there's a third inventory we're going to do, and it's a harms, HARMS, harms inventory, and it's on page 69. Harms inventory is on page 69, right next door. And so I want you to find the second paragraph on page 69, get your highlighter, and this is one of the next key passages that newcomers used to take the steps in the 1940s that produced a 50 to a 75% recovery rate. So highlight with me, second paragraph, page 69. We reviewed our own conduct over years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? We got this all down on paper and looked at it. So on your third inventory is harms, a harms inventory. So you're going to make a third column, and and the question is, who have you hurt? Who have you hurt? I want you just to make a list of any name that comes to mind when I say, who have you hurt? And you may wind up being on the list too, but just who have you hurt? Don't worry about now how you've hurt them, because that's going to come out when you tell your stories. Because every one of the things that you're writing down on this inventory, there's a story behind. There's a story why you're angry at yourself. There's a story why you're afraid of this relationship. There's a story about how you have hurt someone, in your life. And so that's where the patterns are going to come out. That's where the character defects and all are going to come out, from all of that. We'll be looking at that character defects later, but for now, you're just making a list. And the question is, who have you hurt? You guys are doing great. You guys are just doing great. I'm really proud of you. I want you guys to look down. There's one more passage about this step, and it's on page 69. Oh, some people will say, and I've had this come up, you may be thinking it, is what about the sex inventory? Don't we do a sex inventory? Well, in the case of the way it was done here, that our sexual conduct was just another harm. And so it was all rolled into the harms that we had done. So I want you to look at one more passage, and this is in the last paragraph, the last full paragraph on page 69. And it's the second sentence in that paragraph. Do you see where it says we must be willing? Do y'all see that? Y'all got it? Okay. Yeah. And so highlight with me, we must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided we do not bring about still more harm in doing so. Okay. I want you to look over your harms list, and I'm going to ask you a question. If by some chance of miracle, any of the people on your inventory were to magically show up later on tonight and you were to see them, seems unlikely, but I'm just saying, what if? Is there anybody on your inventory that if you were to see them tonight, that you would be willing, not go do it, you would be willing to tell them you were wrong and you were sorry and you want to make it right? Have you got anything on your inventory like that? If you do, I want you to circle or highlight those names right now. If you've got anything on your inventory that if you were to see the person tonight, and that would include you, even if you're on there, if you were willing to make an amend to yourself, if you have God on your list, if you're willing to make an amend to God, it doesn't matter. Don't worry about how. Don't worry about doing it, because we're not doing it. I'm just saying you'd be willing to tell them that you would be willing to say you were wrong and sorry, and you would like to make it right if it's possible. You highlight or underline those names or circle those names now. Well, I want you to know, congratulations, you've done an inventory. You've done the kindergarten of all inventories, because that's what Back to Basics is. It's kindergarten spirituality, or it's kindergarten recovery. And I've never graduated. I just want you to know. Maybe it's because I'm from Mississippi and we're a little slow. Anyway, I don't know. But I'm really glad. Now, you're going to be with the newcomer. And after you've got the newcomer to make their list, I want you to, at the bottom of page 69, I want you to write step 5, page 72, because we're going to immediately look to the 5th step, which is on page 72. And this is where the magic happens. This is the magic. The magic is in step 4. In the 1940s, I want you to know, in these beginner meetings, step 4 and 5 were done at the same time. The newcomer did not write. The sponsor did the writing. That was an axiom of the 1940s. The newcomer told stories. The sponsor did the writing. What was the sponsor writing? Character defects. Sponsor was writing mostly names of people that they owed an amend, and then they were applying one of the 4 ways that amends were done in the 1940s. We'll be talking about that next week, so stay tuned. We're going to make the amends process easier than you ever thought possible, and it's the way it was done in the 1940s that produced a 50 to a 75% recovery rate from alcoholism. Those dudes were doing something right, let me just say. All right, page 72, get your highlighter back out. We're going to go over some of the key passages. And page 72, the discussion of the 5th step starts with the great question in the very first line. Having made our personal inventory, what shall we do about it? That's a great question. Skip a sentence and highlight. We have admitted certain defects, which came out in your inventory, your fears, your harms, your resentments, those all came out in your inventory. We have ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. We have put our finger on weak items in our personal inventory. And now here's a stunning line. Now these are about to be cast out. That's a miracle statement right there. Underline that. Now these are about to be cast out. It's one of the great promises in the big book, and we have a tendency just to read right over it. Those things that were haunting us, those things that drove our addictions, oh, those are going to be cast out. You know, you're like, oh, no problem. Pass the coffee. It's great. Those are going to be cast out. All right. This requires, though, action on our part, which when completed will mean that we have admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our defects. This brings us to the fifth step. Now, I want you to jump down about 5 lines from there, and I want you to find where it says in actual practice. It's kind of in the middle of a line, about 5 lines from there. Highlight, in actual practice, we usually find a solitary self-appraisal insufficient. I think that's one of the funniest lines Bill Wilson ever wrote, because that's exactly how anytime that I assess my character and I do a solitary self-appraisal, I come out fantastic. Just give me solitude and a self-appraisal and no feedback. Oh, I come out fantastic. I justify, I rationalize, I blame, oh, I can come up with excuses. Just give me me solitude and enough time. I'll come up. I'll come out. I'll be the. Many of us, continuing, thought it necessary to go much further. We will be more reconciled to discussing ourselves with another person when we see good reason why we should do so. Well, you're darn right, and you better give me a good reason or I'm not going to do it. Well, it tells us the best reason first. If we skip this vital step, we may not overcome drinking. We may not overcome our addiction. We may not overcome our problems. That's a good reason. Time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives. Trying to avoid this humbling experience, they have turned to easier methods. Almost invariably, they got drunk or stayed sick. Having persevered with the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. Well, we think the reason is they never completed their house cleaning. Oh, they took inventory all right, but hung on to some of the worst items and stopped. They only thought they had lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves, but they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else all their life story. Now, jump down to the last line on that same page. We're going to talk about who do we pick to help us do this. It says, we must be entirely honest. Last line on 73. We must be entirely honest with somebody if we expect to live long or happily in this world. Rightly and naturally, we think well before we choose the person or persons with whom to take this intimate and confidential step. Don't pick them out in Walmart. It doesn't say that. I made that up. Those of us belonging to a religious denomination which requires confession must, and of course will want to go to the properly appointed authority whose duty it is to receive it. Though we have no religious connection, we may still do well to talk with someone ordained by an established religion. We often find such a person quick to see and understand our problem. Of course, we sometimes encounter people who do not understand alcoholics. Whoa. Yeah, we maneuver around those folks. If we cannot or would rather not do this, we search our acquaintance for a closed-mouthed, understanding friend. Perhaps our doctor or psychologist will be the person. The first 164 pages of the Big Book doesn't mention the word sponsorship. Many believe closed-mouthed, understanding friend is the first reference to sponsorship in the Big Book. Now, jump down to the next paragraph. This is important. It says, notwithstanding the great necessity for discussing ourselves with someone, it may be one is so situated that there's no suitable person available, like at a workshop on Zoom with Pavillon with a bald-headed guy from Mississippi. It doesn't say that last part. I made that up, but you get the drift. Is like what it's saying is you can postpone. It says, if that is so, this step may be postponed. You can finish the rest of the steps with me, but I want us all to make a pledge. I want you all to make a pledge with me that you're going to share your inventory with somebody as quick as you can. I think the worst thing in the world is to have an inventory written that we don't do anything with. Okay. So I want you guys to promise me you're going to share your inventory with someone just as quick as you possibly can. Do not delay, please. Do not delay. Okay. Okay. We don't dredge up a bunch of stuff without doing something about it. So this is your call to action. Reed's going to come to your house if you don't do this, and he'll be standing out on the lawn like this, ready. Yeah, he'll be tapping on the window, or the door, just kind of saying, done that infant, I get your big book, come see me. We're going for coffee. So it says may be postponed only, however, if we hold ourselves in complete readiness to go through with it at the first opportunity. We say this because we are very anxious to talk to the right person. It's important that he be able to keep a confidence, that he fully and approve of what we're driving at, that he will not try to change our plan, but we must not use this as a mere excuse to postpone. When we decide who is to hear our story, what? We waste no time. We don't dawdle around. Notice the language of the steps. Next, at once, and we waste no time. The steps are they're written and made to be taken quickly and often. Now, jump down to the next paragraph. This is the fifth step, promises. This is what's going to come true once we've done our fifth step. It starts with a couple of lines about the fifth step. It says we pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Once we have taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. How about that for a promise? We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. Remember last week when we talked about the requirement, the book talked about a spiritual experience as being a requirement. That's kind of the whole point of this, is to have this spiritual experience. That's the first place in the big book that the promised spiritual experience is first mentioned. It's not until after you've done your fifth step. That's why it's so important. I mean, even do a crappy one, just do one. Underline, we begin to have a spiritual experience. The first place in the book, it's first mentioned. And here's what that says to me. You can do the first three steps over and over again and never get better. You can write 100 inventories, never get better. It's not until you share your stories that you start to have that spiritual experience. That's where it begins. That's why it's so important. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. We feel we are on the broad highway. There's a term for the higher power, capital B, capital H. Broad highway, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Another term for the higher power, capital S, capital U. Okay, and now I got to tell you a story. So I was second in command of a $30 million company. I was your worst nightmare, an alcoholic with an expense account. It was awful. And I put myself into, I didn't get to go to a place like Pavillon. It would have saved me so much time, but I didn't. I ended up going, I put myself in this little jitter joint, and I was in that place for about a week, and they called me up to the front and they said, two things have happened on the same day. It's a miracle. Number one, your insurance has run out. Number two, you're cured. I thought, I think I'm just hearing irony. I'm not sure. I said to the lady, I don't feel cured. She says, oh, we assure you, you are. I said, well, where do I go now? She said, well, for you, we recommend Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, well, where's that? And she handed me this little booklet with all the AA meetings. And I looked through the thing and I turned the first 3 or 4 pages. I was still on Monday. And I thought, I don't know who these Alcoholic Anonymous people are, but they're a bunch of meeting fools. I mean, it's like this underground society appearing in a church basement near you as these underground people have been meeting and huddled up. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to take up smoking again. This is not good. And I asked her how many meetings I needed to go to in order for me to be cured. She said, well, she said, for you, we recommend 90 meetings in 90 days. I thought I had gone deaf. 90. Did you say 90 in 90 days? I thought to myself, I didn't say anything. I was too stunned. I thought to myself, I mean, I've got a life, for crying out loud. It's not a very good one, but it's the only one I got. How in the world am I going to do? Anyway, so they discharged me, and the night they discharged me was one afternoon. It was a Monday afternoon, and that night I went to my very first AA meeting. And I sat out in the parking lot watching people going in. I'm kind of judging everybody. I went, oh, there goes a real alcoholic right there. Looky there, and then I saw this other guy stumbled out of his truck. This is Mississippi, and I said, woo, boy, he made it just in time. And a couple of guys were laughing. I thought they must be the president and vice president. And you know how the disease talks to us? It was yakking away at me, telling me I needed to go home and get out of there. You're going to be embarrassed. You're going to hate this. And I finally had this kind of moment of clarity. And the message I got was, well, you drove this far, you might as well walk in. And so I walked into my first AA meeting. I was going to sit on the back row, and these yahoos were sitting in a circle, which I thought was no way to greet a newcomer. And I ended up sitting down, and the guy with the 3-ring binder, says, well, let's introduce ourselves. I see some newcomers here. And I thought, oh, brother, just shoot me now. This can't get any worse. And they start introducing themselves. I'm George, I'm an alcoholic. This is Mississippi. I'm Stinky, I'm an alcoholic. I'm Bubba, I'm an alcoholic. I'm Skeeter, I'm Sally, I'm an alcoholic. I'm Trixie. Well, this howdy train is coming around the corner, and it's bearing down on me, and I'm making up aliases, and it came, it ran right up onto me, and I just blurted out for the first time that I was Carver. I was an alcoholic, and they seemed reasonably unimpressed with this grand admission that I had made. And they did the creepiest things. They held hands, I was wanting sanitizer. I didn't know where them people been. And they threw dollar bills in baskets. I was like, this is no way to grow an organization. I went up to the guy with the 3-ring binder, gave him my American Express card, said, give me 90 days worth. And he looked at me, and he kind of looked a little stunned, and he said, keep coming back. I didn't know what he was talking about. And I ended up going, I ended up going to, started going to those meetings. I wanted to go to a different one because I didn't know, maybe they were doing it wrong. So I started going to those meetings, and it was a Saturday. I'll never forget. It was a really big meeting. And there was this guy was there. He had bright white hair, and he had a funny accent. And he said to me, he said something, and I can't remember what he said, to this day, but whatever it was, it just stunned me. He described in vivid detail what I was feeling at the time. And he was happy, and I wasn't. And I thought to myself, I don't know about nobody here, but that guy gets it. And I went up to that guy at the end of the meeting, and I thanked him. I thanked him for what he said. And he said to me, he said, "Hey, I hadn't seen you around here before. You new?" And I said, "No, I'm not new. I've been coming for 2 weeks." Like I got this thing. Anyway, he says 2 weeks. He says, that's really great. He says, "How are you sleeping?" Isn't that a great diagnostic of early recovery? And so we talked about sleep. And anyway, we ended up going outside. Have you ever just blurted something out of your mouth, that you didn't, your brain wasn't engaged? We go outside and he says, "I gotta go." And this thing blurted out of my mouth. I said, "What do you think I ought to do now?" He reached in one pocket, he pulled out an old receipt. He reached in the other pocket and he pulled out a pen with no cap on it. And I thought, he's an idiot. He's got a pen with no cap on it in his front pocket. Well, he's an idiot. And anyway, he wrote down his number. He gave it to me and he said, "Why don't you call me tonight and we'll talk about it?" And the next thing I said was, "What time?" That night we talked. And he asked me if I was going to a meeting the next day. I said I was. And he suggested that, he said, "How about if I meet you there?" Which I said was great. And then we started meeting. He said, "Why don't we just talk to each other each morning? Why don't we call each other mid-morning and check in?" And we did. And after a little bit of that, one Saturday, he said, what are you doing Saturday? And he said, "What are you doing Saturday?" I said, "Not much." And he said, "Why don't you meet me up at this coffee shop and bring your big book?" So I did. I thought he wanted to borrow it back because I couldn't make heads or tails of it. I was glad to give it back to him. And so we met at this coffee shop. And in 1 hour, I'm here to tell you, in 1 hour, he took me through the first 3 steps, just like we did last week. And then he said, "Now you're going to write an inventory." And he gave me a deadline. We were going to meet the next Saturday, and I needed to have my inventory written. And so the next Saturday, I showed up with my inventory, just like you did. It was just a bunch of columns with stuff. And I showed up with the inventory. I opened it up. I read my inventory, told him my stories. And he says, at the end of me, I closed the little spiral notebook. And he looked at me and he said, "Did you leave anything out?" I panicked. I thought he knew something about me that had been in the paper or something that I'd like forgotten or something. And so he said, I said, I don't think I left anything out. But he says, "Oh no." He says, "Listen," he says, "if you think of something we should have talked about later," he said, "just call me up and we'll meet and we'll talk about it." Isn't that great? You don't have to do the perfect inventory. You're not going to, you just do the best you can. And so he told me this thing, and this is what I came to tell you guys tonight. He told me he needed to tell me something that his sponsor told him, and his sponsor told him, and that this had been passed down through the generations of recovery. And it's what I have been called to tell you guys tonight. It's the single most important thing that I ever say to anybody in my life. My sponsor said to me, as I say to you tonight, you are good men and women who have suffered under the lash of a terrible, terrible disease that's caused you to do some things you would have never done if it hadn't have been that way. And because of that, you are forgiven. And here's the way the forgiveness works. You guys here on this Zoom tonight, do you guys all forgive each other? I promise you this, the people in the rooms of recovery where you go, they all forgive you. The people in the rooms of recovery all over the planet, they all forgive you. I certainly forgive you. And most importantly, God forgives you because you are good men and women who have suffered under the lash of a terrible disease that you did not ask to have. You are unwitting participants in a terrible disease, and in some cases, someone else's terrible disease, and in some cases, both. But you didn't ask to have it, but by George, we've got it. And it caused us to do some things we would have never done if it hadn't have been that way. And because of that, you are forgiven. And I can't explain to you what happened next. But as I walked away from the table that day, I remember thinking that I needed to let just a little piece of that forgiveness leak out of me and leak onto my dad. I guess that meant that my dad was a good man who had also suffered under the lash of a terrible disease that had caused him to do some things he would have never done if he'd had it. Maybe, just maybe, a little of that forgiveness could leak out of me and leak onto my dad. And I think that's the moment where forgiveness and recovery became real for me in that moment. It grew from there, but that was the opening. Now, fast forward from there about a year later, and I go on this spiritual retreat with a bunch of normies. I love normies. And they put us into these little small groups and they ask us to share about spiritual experiences. And I completely forgot my audience. And I told these folks, I said, spiritual experience, oh man, I'm an addict. I've done terrible stuff. I've just done, oh, you wouldn't even believe it. I've hurt people, done a lot of damage. And, but I got a sponsor in AA, took me through the steps, wrote an inventory, shared my inventory, told me I was forgiven. I go around now sponsoring people, listening to their inventory, telling them they're forgiven. It's a spiritual experience. You ought to try it sometime. This woman just turned pale and she looked at me with this look of concern over the top of her glasses. And she said, so you go around giving absolution? I realized I just offended an entire religion in addition to this one old lady. And I said something like, well, keep coming back. And I got the heck out of there. But I found this little jovial priest named Father Ed Lundeen. And I went up to Father Ed and I said, Father Ed, I got something real important I got to ask you. I'm an addict, an alcoholic. I got sober in AA. I wrote an inventory, shared it with my sponsor. He told me I was forgiven. He's not a priest. And I go around telling people they're forgiven. And I needed to know, after I hear their inventories, I said, I need to know, am I doing anything wrong? And Father Ed looked at me. His eyes got bright. He got a big smile on his face. And he told me, you keep doing whatever it is you've been doing. So I don't know about anybody else, but I do know this about you guys. All you guys are forgiven because Father Ed said so. So here's to forgiveness. Here's to the fifth step. Here's to recovery. Here's to you. And here's to this sense of peace that comes by sharing your stories with somebody else. I love you guys so much, and I'm so grateful to have spent this time with you. I can't wait till we talk next week. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you. Fred, read every one of these passages, go in order, and you'll be taking your sponsee through the step exactly the way it was done in the 1940s that produced a 50 to a 75% recovery rate from alcoholism. right then, fourth and fifth steps were done at the same time. So you could sit down with one way I do it, Fred, is I'll have them write their columns, their 3 columns, and then I meet with them the very next day and have them share all their stories with me. I impart the forgiveness to them as I did to you, and then we move right on to step 6. Yeah, it does. Especially people that were taken through their journey through the steps was a much lengthier, arduous process. And I want to remind, as I said last week, I'm not telling anybody you're doing anything wrong. If you take somebody through a long process through the steps, God bless you. If you take anytime someone sits with somebody over a cup of coffee and shares steps and stories, that's a hero to me. All I'm suggesting is this is the way it was done in the 1940s. And there's some takeaways that we could gain from it. What I do is when I get a new sponsee, I take them through the steps quickly. I get them through as fast as I can, and then I slow them down. Then we can slow down, and then we can go through, and they could write papers on their surrender, and they can do columned inventories and all. This back to basics method is the kindergarten of recovery. So go to kindergarten first before you go to high school. Well, I tell you, I think anytime that any of us recover in any way, it's a miracle. It's a miracle that we can overcome the compulsions that we had. It's just nothing short of miraculous. And this method, yeah, I don't think it's for everybody. I think some people need I think some people respond more to a slow, methodical, approach. And that's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. But I think that there's something to be gained just from, if this isn't to be employed, there's something to be gained from the history point of view of how this was done way back when, because this is the method that was used in the 1940s, and it really was successful. But times change, and I'm not saying that this is for everybody, but my personal experience is my sponsor and I did the first 3 steps in an hour. We met again a week later, and I arrived there with my 4-step inventory, and I left there on step 9 in about an hour and a half. And I started, continuing going to AA, and I was listening to the stories of other people had done it, and I thought I was shortchanged. I thought, well, he didn't make me write. I didn't have to write an encyclopedia and all this stuff that people were doing. But I never looked back. I never stopped. This was kind of what happened to me. And I had no idea that there was archival significance in this method, So, I'm not trying to convince anybody. I'm just here just to show you guys what was done. It's something that I have employed with great success with newcomers. I've had some newcomers that responded better to a slower, more methodical approach, and I can slow down. Listen, and I've got sheets and sheets and sheets and sheets and sheets that I can give people if that's what they want and respond to. I'm glad to do it that way. Yeah, so I don't think there's any one method for everybody. Joe and Charlie shared the podium with Wally Patton, and they said that the Joe and Charlie method wasn't for newcomers. It was for people that had had a little bit of time under their belt, and that they endorsed going through a back to basics first, because they said that the inventory method that they were proposing was a little too detailed for newcomers. And so they suggested that it should be done, really after, you've had a little bit of recovery under your belt. And that's at their own, when they were alive, that was at their own admission that was said on the microphone. So I love Joe and Charlie. I mean, it's brilliant what they're doing, but it's like, that's kind of like the high school course. Then you got the big book comes alive, now you got the college course, so this represents kindergarten. And the thing is, I think you hit on something really important. I think that a lot of newcomers get discouraged because they're not feeling better fast enough. And they get a little discouraged. They're coming to meetings and they're hearing stuff. And then, somebody hands them a big book, says, read this and call me. And they read the big book and it doesn't make sense. And so this method, I promise you, I take it when I see a newcomer, I ask them if they want to go to breakfast and I'm buying. And then we go to breakfast. And over breakfast, I take them through the first 3 steps. And then I give them 3 napkins. And one of them I write, are you, what are you afraid of? What are you angry about? What are you, the second napkin, what are you afraid of? And the third napkin, who have you hurt? If I perceive the guy as really chatty, I'll tell him, just give me the top 10. I tell the guy because I'm busy, but that's not it. I'm just trying to contain him, and then I tell him, could you make these lists tonight? Invariably, the person says, yes, yeah, I can make these, just 3 lists. Yeah, I can do that tonight. I said, great. I'm going to be in my car for about 2 hours tomorrow. I'm leaving the house at 7:30. Can you call me at 7:30 with your list? Yeah. By the time I get to where I'm going, I've got them on step 9 in 2 hours. Yeah. And I've pulled off the side of the road and we've done the 7-step prayer together. And then we're going to talk about character defects next week. See, I simplify that. Well, character defects, you're living with a bunch of anger, you're living in abject fear, and you've hurt a bunch of people, probably selfishly, usually how it goes, maybe dishonestly. So, are you ready to let go of those things? Yeah. Were you willing to pray and ask God to remove those things so that you could have a better life? Yeah. So we pray, anyway, and people are getting better. I'm available to them. And when we get to the 11th step, one of the things we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing guidance. And I'm going to show you how guidance was done in the 1940s. And so we commit with the newcomer to share guidance with each other. I'm going to want them doing their 5 minutes of quiet in the morning, if they're willing, and to be writing down their guidance. And so I'd like to know, let's share guidance with each other. What came up for you? I'll share what came up for me. And that sort of keeps us bound together. But Taylor, the most important thing is, I remember when I was early on, I was giving out my phone number to people and I was having coffee and, talking to people about what I had been through. And, hardly people were calling back, or people I would meet with them and then I wouldn't hear from them again. And I told my sponsor, I told him, I don't know that people are staying sober. I've given out my phone number about 400 times and I've had 3 people call me back. And, I'm just not sure this is working. And he said, are you sober? And I said, well, yeah, I'm sober. He says, well, then your sponsorship is 100% successful. See, I'm not doing this. We're not in the outcome business. I have no idea what anybody on this Zoom or anything else is going to ever do. I have no idea. I'm called to show up for anybody that reaches out and sit down with them over coffee and read big book and share stories and tell them, and what they do with that, God bless them, is their business. And some will stay and some will go, but I don't know who. and it'll shock you. The ones that I think I'm never going to hear from again, they freaking call every day, for a year. And the ones that I think can quote the big book over backwards and forwards, that I think are going to end up writing the 5th edition, they never call back. So I don't know these are all spiritual energies, and they're way bigger than me. I share this stuff so that I can stay sober, so that I can be a dad to Alex, a sober dad to Alex. It really is more complicated than that. If I start getting into who's doing what and what are they doing with it and everything, now I'm all goofed up and I need to go to Al-Anon. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'll see you next week. And I really appreciate you staying with us and being here. It means a lot to me.